On July 18, 1983, the sky over what was then northern Goiás, a region that years later would become the state of Tocantins, dawned with a fine mist and mild temperatures, typical of the dry season in the Brazilian highlands. Eduardo Ribeiro Mendes, a 34-year-old veterinarian from Goiânia, said goodbye to his colleagues at the research camp, located near what we now know as Jalapão State Park. The area, still little explored at that time, was already emerging as one of the regions with the greatest biodiversity in the Brazilian savanna. Eduardo was a meticulous man, graduated from the Federal University of Goiás, with a specialization in wildlife from USP, married to Helena and father of 2 children, Lucas, 7 years old, and Marina, just 4. The veterinarian had been in the region for 3 weeks as part of a scientific expedition, cataloging native species for a project by the Brazilian Agricultural Research Corporation in Brapa. It was his 3rd fieldwork that year. "I'll be back before lunch. I'm just going to check some camera traps we set up yesterday on the East Trail," Eduardo told biologist Marcelo Assunca, the expedition coordinator, as he adjusted his backpack. It was 6:43 a.m. when the veterinarian set off alone along the trail that ran alongside one of the tributaries of the Rio Novo, carrying a water bottle, a walkie-talkie, a compass, a notebook, a camera, and some basic collection equipment. At 12:30 p.m., with the sun blazing overhead and temperatures reaching 3 degrees Celsius, Eduardo still hadn't returned. The first to express concern was Marcelo himself, who tried unsuccessfully to contact him by radio. "At first, we thought his radio battery had died or that he was somewhere without communication." This was common in the region, the biologist later reported in his statement to the police. At 2 p.m., already apprehensive, 3 team members followed the same trail in search of their missing colleague. The dense scrubland vegetation, interspersed with paths of burity palms and small streams, made the search difficult. The trail, poorly marked, forked at several points. Only 2 of the 6 camera traps had been checked, as evidenced by the altered position of the equipment. There were no signs of a struggle, blood, or any indication of an accident in the places Eduardo visited. He had simply disappeared between the 2nd and 3rd traps over a stretch of approximately 800 meters. At 6 p.m., with the sky already darkening, the search team returned to the camp and radioed the authorities. Due to the isolation of the region, it was only the following morning that a team from the military police of São Félix do Tocantins, then a small district, arrived at the site to begin the official search. The news of Eduardo's disappearance reached his family in Goiânia through a phone call from Marcelo to Helena, who immediately went into an emotional meltdown. "It was like the world had collapsed on me." The police later asked me if Eduardo had any problems, if he could have run away. But anyone who knew my husband knew that he would never abandon his family or his work. "Something serious had happened," Helena declared in an interview given. Years later, the first 3 days of the search involved 27 military police officers, 14 local volunteers, including local guides familiar with the area, and members of the scientific expedition themselves. The perimeter was gradually expanded to a 10 km radius from the point where Eduardo was last seen. Sniffer dogs were brought in from Goiânia, but the high temperatures and arid terrain made their work difficult. On July 22nd, just 4 days after the disappearance, the official search was drastically scaled back due to a lack of resources and the need to redeploy police personnel. Eduardo's family, distraught, hired a private search and rescue team, which remained in the region for another 2 weeks without success. The area, extremely isolated and with complex topography, was a natural labyrinth of mountains, canyons, trails, and rock formations. If you want to follow more cases like this, which shake up society as a whole and reveal hidden truths, Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out. No investigation. The police investigation was opened at the Porto Nacional police station, then the most well-structured city near the region, under the responsibility of Chief Antonio Carlos Ferreira. We had 3 initial lines of investigation: trail accident, wild animal attack, or crime, the chief explained in the court records. The hypothesis of voluntary escape, although formally considered, was quickly discarded after analyzing Eduardo's profile and his stable financial situation. The first contradiction arose with the testimony of Rodrigo Mendonça, a laboratory technician on the expedition. He said Eduardo had seemed restless the night before he disappeared, leaving the campsite alone for about 40 minutes after dinner. "I thought he was just observing the sky or wanting privacy to talk to his family on the radio," said Rodrigo, who had not mentioned this detail in his initial interviews with the police. The mystery deepened when Eduardo's backpack was found. 17 days after his disappearance, approximately 2.5 kilometers from where he was supposed to be, in the opposite direction of the original trail. The backpack also contained a half-empty water bottle, a notebook with records up to the previous day, a camera with partially used film, and curiously, a broken compass. The radio was not in the backpack, nor was it found later. The police then began investigating Eduardo's relationships within the research team. Rumors arose of a possible disagreement between him and Claudio Montero, a forestry engineer who was also on the expedition. Witnesses reported a heated argument between the two 3 days before the disappearance regarding research methodology. Claudio, however, had a solid alibi for the day of his disappearance. He was in radio contact with the Embrapa base in Palmas, a fact confirmed by communication records. Eduardo's wife, Helena, traveled to Jalapão twice during the first months of the investigation. On her second visit, she brought back disturbing information. Eduardo had mentioned in his last call home that he was close to an important discovery that could change the course of the research. He didn't provide specific details, but he seemed enthusiastic and, at the same time, cautious. The investigation suffered a significant setback when, in October 1983, a fire swept through part of the expedition's camp, destroying some equipment and documents. Although authorities classified the incident as accidental, common during the dry season in the highlands, speculation arose about possible criminal action to eliminate evidence. Meanwhile, in Goiânia, Eduardo's family faced the painful process of adapting to his absence. Helena had to take over the family's finances, returning to work as a teacher. The young children, not fully understanding the situation, asked daily when their father would return. The hardest part wasn't the physical absence, but the uncertainty. "We didn't know whether to wait, cry, or move on," Helena recounted in her personal diary, later shared with researchers. In March 1984, after almost 8 months of fruitless investigation, the case began to cool down. The lack of concrete evidence, the region's logistical difficulties, and pressure for results in other cases led to the investigation losing priority. Occasional searches by local authorities continued for a few more months, but without the initial intensity. An intriguing point that was never adequately clarified was the testimony of Joaquim Silveira, a gold miner who worked illegally in the region. He claimed to have seen 2 days after the disappearance an unidentified vehicle traveling on a rarely used secondary road close to the search area. It was a white pickup truck with tinted windows. "I thought it was strange because no one uses that path. It's very difficult to drive," he declared. The police investigated the information, but without the license plate number or further details, the lead faded. On the first anniversary of the disappearance, in July 1984, Eduardo's family organized a memorial service in Goiânia. The event, widely covered by the local press, temporarily revived interest in the case. TV Globo's Linha Direita program even produced a special report on the mystery, which generated dozens of calls with supposed information, all of which later proved to be unfounded. In 1985, a new and promising lead emerged when a fisherman found on the banks of the Novo River, approximately 12 kilometers from the disappearance site, remnants of fabric that could have belonged to the shirt Eduardo was wearing the day he vanished. Laboratory analysis, however, was inconclusive due to the material's advanced state of deterioration. Chief Inspector Antonio Carlos, already disillusioned with the lack of progress, transferred to Brasilia in 1986, and the case was handed over to Chief Inspector Ronaldo Bastos, who reopened several lines of investigation. One focused on possible land conflicts in the region, as the area was beginning to attract interest from farmers and real estate speculators due to its tourist potential. In January 1988, when the state of Tocantins was officially created from the division of Goiás, the case of Eduardo Ribeiro Mendes was formally transferred to the newly created Missing Persons Police Station in Palmas. With the administrative reorganization, new eyes turned to the mystery. Now, almost 5 years old, Detective Sandra Moreira, assigned to review old cases, identified inconsistencies in the testimonies of 2 members of the original expedition. In addition to Rodrigo Mendonça, Paulo Guimarães, a geologist, also presented contradictions in his statements about the events of the night before the disappearance. Recalled to testify, Paulo admitted that he and Eduardo had left the camp that night, not for scientific observations, as initially stated, but to verify information received from a local resident. Eduardo was contacted by a local resident who reported finding animal bones in a strange configuration, possibly indicating a ritual. As a veterinarian specializing in wildlife, he was intrigued and decided to investigate, Paulo reported. I accompanied him out of solidarity, but we only stayed there for about 20 minutes. We didn't see anything conclusive and returned to camp. I didn't mention this earlier because I thought it was irrelevant, and because that resident was engaged in illegal hunting. I didn't want to involve him. This new information led the police to search for the resident, identified as Sebastião Pereira, then 62 years old. Located in a small village near Materos, Sebastião confirmed the encounter with Eduardo, but added disturbing details. They weren't just bones of ordinary animals. There was an animal I'd never seen before. It seemed otherworldly, and there were markings on the surrounding rocks, like symbols. Sebastião's description raised 2 new possibilities: the existence of an unknown animal species in the region, which would explain Eduardo's scientific enthusiasm mentioned by his wife, or the practice of rituals by some isolated group in Jalapão. Both hypotheses could explain the veterinarian's sudden interest in returning to the area alone. In 1990, the case gained new and unexpected momentum when Helena, now working as a research coordinator at the Federal University of Goiás, received an anonymous letter. The envelope, posted in Brasilia, contained only a small piece of paper with the geographic coordinates of a point in Jalapão in the phrase, "The truth is buried, but not as you imagine." Helena immediately handed the material over to the police, who organized an operation to verify the indicated location. The expedition, carried out in August 1990, found only an area of Cerrado without any distinctive features. Excavations around the perimeter revealed nothing significant, and the clue was dismissed as a prank or an attempt to divert the investigation. However, something important happened during this operation. Police Chief Ronaldo Bastos met Januário Santos, a cowboy, who had lived isolated on a small property in the region for over 40 years. Januário casually mentioned that at the time of the disappearance, local residents had reported seeing strange lights in the sky for several consecutive nights. These reports had never been verified, reached the official authorities due to the local population's isolation and distrust of the police. The locals are afraid to get involved with things they don't understand. Many saw the lights, but no one wanted to talk because they thought they could be spirits or government intervention that was better left unknown, Januario explained. The testimony, although colorful, was recorded in the investigation, but it didn't generate any immediate developments. By 1992, 9 years after the disappearance, the case was practically closed, although formally it was still listed as open. Helena had moved with her children to São Paulo, where she gradually rebuilt her life. Lucas, now 16, showed interest in following in his father's footsteps, while Marina, 13, retained only vague memories of Eduardo. It was that same year that an unexpected event brought the case back into the spotlight. A documentary crew from TV Cultura, producing a series about Jalapão, interviewed several local residents and ended up recording a disturbing testimony from Dona Josefa, a midwife and healer of the woods. According to her, in July 1983, days after the disappearance of the doctor from Goiânia, as Eduardo was known in the region, an unidentified man sought her help with injuries consistent with a fall or a fight. He wasn't from here. He spoke differently. He had a nasty cut on his forehead and a bruised hand. I asked him to explain what happened, but he only said he'd fallen on an expedition. I became suspicious, gave him the medicine, and he left in a pickup truck. I never saw him again, said Dona Josefa. The physical description didn't match Eduardo, but the testimony raised the possibility that someone else might be involved in the case. Perhaps someone who had encountered or confronted him on the trail. The police tried to obtain more details, but the elderly woman, then 87, no longer had any precise memories regarding dates or specific physical characteristics. Leave a comment and say never give up on the truth if you believe that all missing people deserve to be found. On April 23, 1994, exactly 3,927 days after the disappearance of Eduardo Ribeiro Mendes, Cowboy Januario Santos was driving a small herd of cattle through a remote area of Jalapão, approximately 17 kilometers from where the veterinarian had last been seen. Heavy rain the night before had caused a small landslide on a hillside, revealing a narrow opening in the rocks. Curious, Januario tied his horse and with difficulty managed to squeeze through the opening. What he found inside would forever change the course of the case. It was a small natural cave, approximately 15 square meters, clearly used as a shelter. On the dirt floor, partially preserved by the cave's dry atmosphere, were a pair of worn boots, a wristwatch, a notebook with pages, hardened by time, and in the background, a human skeleton. Januario, frightened by the discovery, left everything as it was and rode for almost 5 hours to the nearest police station. The next day, a civil police team, accompanied by a forensic doctor from Palmas, arrived at the scene. Preliminary identification was made possible thanks to the watch, an automatic Seiko with the inscription, Eduardo with love, Helena, 1980, and personal documents found in an inside pocket of the notebook. It was a moment of shock and at the same time of relief, said Chief Carlos Druin, then in charge of the case. After 11 years, we finally had a concrete answer about the whereabouts of Eduardo Ribeiro Mendes. Forensic analysis of the skeleton revealed that Eduardo had suffered a fracture in his right leg, likely resulting from a fall. There were no signs of violence, such as gunshot wounds or defensive fractures that might indicate a struggle. The most likely theory, according to experts, was that Eduardo had suffered an accident during his solo expedition, managed to drag himself into the cave in search of shelter, but unable to get out due to his injury and the narrow entrance. He ended up dying from dehydration or infection. But the most impressive thing was not the condition of the remains, but the contents of the notebook found next to the body. In the final pages, written in increasingly shaky handwriting, Eduardo had documented his final thoughts and the reason that had brought him to that remote area. 170,783. I managed to locate the point indicated by Sebastião. It's extraordinary. The markings on the rocks are unmistakably artificial, but they do not correspond to any known indigenous pattern in the region. And the bones I need to photograph and collect samples tomorrow. 18,783. I left camp early. I didn't tell anyone except Paul about the real purpose. If that's what I think, I'll need solid evidence before sharing. The trail is more difficult than it seemed yesterday. A few hours later, accident. I slipped on a wet rock near the second fork. Drop of approximately 4 meters. Broken right leg. Bone. Exposure, unbearable pain. Radio broke in the fall, trying to crawl back to the trail. Rear entrance. I found this cave. It is impossible to continue with the leg in this state. Bleeding controlled with belt and shirt. I have water for 2 days. At most, if I can make a makeshift splint, I'll try to get out tomorrow. Illegible date, high fever, leg infection, delirium. I saw Helena and the children here with me. Terrible thirst. The cave entrance appears to have narrowed even further after yesterday's storm. Or maybe it's my weakness that doesn't allow me to force my way through. Last entry. I know I won't leave here. I want you to know that I found something important. The markings on the stones. The symbols correspond exactly to the engravings found at the archaeological site of Peruacu, in Minas, more than 1,000 kilometers from here. This proves migration or contact between pre-Columbian peoples on a scale never before documented. And the bones are not just of known animals. There are spectacles. I fear my discovery will die with me in this cave. Helena, Lucas Marina, I love you more than anything. I'm sorry, Per. The page ended abruptly. Along with the notebook, researchers found a small, improvised bag containing some bone fragments that later analysis confirmed belonged to species previously uncatalogued in the Jalapão region, and a piece of rock with inscriptions. The scientific discovery that Eduardo had made, and for which he inadvertently sacrificed his life, revolutionized the archaeological and zoological understanding of the region. The Eduardo Mendes site, as it was officially named in 1995, became the subject of study by researchers from Brazil and abroad, confirming the veterinarian's theory about pre-Columbian migrations and revealing a greater historical biodiversity than previously imagined in the Brazilian savanna. For Helena and her children, the closure of the case brought a mixture of renewed grief and comfort. I spent 11 years imagining the worst-case scenarios, haunted by nightmares of kidnapping and violence, she said in an interview upon receiving her husband's remains. Knowing that he died doing what he loved, contributing to science, brings some meaning to our loss. Lucas, who at 18 was already studying veterinary medicine following in his father's footsteps, participated as an observer on the scientific team that conducted the first excavations at the archaeological site discovered by Eduardo. It's as if he left a legacy for me, a path to follow, said the young man, visibly moved. The case of Eduardo Ribeiro Mendes illustrates the complexities of disappearance investigations in remote areas of Brazil, especially in an age of technological limitations. The story also demonstrates how nature sometimes keeps its secrets and answers for years, until chance reveals the truth. In 1998, a commemorative plaque was installed at the entrance to Jalapão State Park, honoring Eduardo and his involuntary contribution to scientific knowledge in the region. The cave where his body was found has been sealed for preservation reasons, but the nearby archaeological site remains open to researchers. The shocking discovery made by Cowboy Januario not only brought closure to a family devastated by the disappearance, but also rewrote part of the archaeological and biological history of central Brazil, proving that even in the most tragic circumstances, the pursuit of knowledge can leave a lasting legacy. If you've watched this far, it's because you care about these cases that mark families forever. Leave a comment saying, "I watched this far so I can get to know you and know who truly cares about the search for truth." Don't forget to like this video and share it with your friends and family so more people know this impressive story and one man's tireless dedication to Brazilian science. M.